All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome. We're a couple minutes early, so we'll let all of you start to trickle in. But thank you for joining us. If you're just joining us now, we're going to talk about free agency. A lot went down today. Pete, where were you when you got the first notification of the very first signing?
So I was just at home, and so I saw the first two signings and, made a couple calls, did some tweets. Took the dogs for a really short walk, come back, and they'd sign two more guys. So pretty hectic. I mean, this is your first go through this.
Yeah.
So you don't know what free agency used to be like around here. I mean,
no, I've only heard stories of how things used to be a lot slower than they are now.
Yeah, you would have been able to sleep in today and everything. But so I don't know, what did you make of it, your first go through?
Interesting. Yesterday, I was really paranoid. I thought that at, what was it, like noon Eastern time, 11 Central.
Yeah.
I was at the gym. I saw you from afar. I don't think you saw me. I tried to get your attention.
I did not see you.
It's okay.
That's all right. I'm not very observant, so.
But I was at the gym, and I just got this feeling of guilt. Like, I needed to get out of there because maybe something was going to happen, and I needed to be ready to go if something did happen.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually I left. And then this morning I was like, you know what? I'm going to go early. I'm going to get to the gym early and get in before anything happens, any news breaks. And lo and behold, the news broke while I was at the gym. So that's what happens when we try to be proactive around here.
It does. So we got questions pouring in here. I don't know where we...
Well, Andrew points out that the Ted Thompson era is over, and it certainly is over.
Yeah, I'll probably... because I'll write about all this stuff tomorrow. One of the things I'll get into is, if you look at all the Ron Wolf proteges, it's really Thompson who's the outlier. All these other guys are pretty aggressive. Dorsey, John Schneider, very aggressive. Reggie McKenzie was pretty aggressive out in Oakland, and Al Gutekunst too. So it was Thompson the one who took the draft and developed to the extreme, and as compared with all the other guys that Wolf, all the other GMs that Wolf worked with.
Mm-hmm. So Nick just asked, oh God, that is the camera is right there. Hi guys, sorry, your questions are on the screen here. I'm not gonna block the camera. Nick asks how the free agency signings from today will impact the draft, and that's something that Tom Silverstein, I think, wrote about today on our website.
That was actually me that wrote about that.
Oh, you're maybe.
I know, we're interchangeable. We're like NFL running backs.
He mentioned that in his story from today, but that was your column from yesterday too.
Yeah.
So okay, yeah. Pete has some words to say about this.
But it's basically it opens the door. Whatever pressure they would have been feeling internally to get a pass rusher, to get a guy at a specific position, especially in those first 3 rounds with those 4 picks, they can pick anybody they want, and they'll have to feel like their pass rush will at least be okay with these 2 signings. So they could pick an inside linebacker. Tight end, those are real possibilities. If Metcalf, the receiver, is there, they could think about picking him. Mm-hmm. So the door is wide open. They can do whatever they want in those picks and just pick best athlete, which improves your chances of getting a special player.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that'd be interesting. I initially, especially those tight ends, especially as the Packers are going to certainly be looking and needing tight ends and having 2 pretty strong tight ends available from Iowa. But I couldn't really fathom them being available to the Packers because I saw the Packers picking an edge rusher at 12 and not necessarily a tight end.
There's no way at 30.
And they're not going to be there at 30. Yeah. So maybe if they like him enough.
Yeah, if they think, really this is the best guy, they can take him.
Okay, so Ken asks a great question because this is something that's been burning on a lot of people's minds. Yeah. Do you understand, that's a great way to phrase it, do you understand the cap implications yet of the day's moves?
Well, we don't know the cap numbers, but because when you look at how big these contracts are, we can assume that the cap numbers, they kept the first-year cap numbers low. Now, I think what they usually like to do is to keep the cap number an average per year, to keep those about the same, because then you go year by year. When you cut the guy, then you're not getting all that cap acceleration. With a couple of these deals, they're going to have to have front-loaded them. With the big signing bonuses, I'm guessing the 2 pass rushers, their cap numbers combined are going to be about half. If you combine what their average salaries are, we're talking, $30 million, a little over $30 million.
Right.
Their cap numbers will probably be half that. I mean, to fit all these guys in, they had to be, because they didn't have that much cap room to work with. $34 million minus the draft class, a few million, minus wanting to go in with $5 to $7 million on the cap. for cap room during the season for moves. That only leaves them with, I don't know, in the upper 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm guessing they used, over 20 with these four guys. That's going to be, closer to 25 million than 20 for these four, and that's keeping their first year cap numbers low.
Sure. So with all of that in mind, lots of people want to know, are the Packers going to be looking for any other free agents going forward? Someone asked about Earl Thomas. I would imagine some of those bigger ticket guys are going to be out of the price range for the Packers at this point.
I mean, you got to think so, right? They could conceivably cut Bulaga and save, I think it's $5 or $6 million. They could cut Tremont Williams and save another $5 million, but they seem to have plans to have those guys on the roster and to play them this year. So they could. I would definitely never say never on any of this stuff because you never know what teams are thinking. But it does make you think that they're down to any signings will be pretty cheap guys under $5 million for sure.
Mm-hmm. Clay Matthews. So we know Nick Perry has been cut. The Packers have made that official.
Yep.
Clay Matthews, we don't know about that yet. A lot of people Don specifically asked whether or not he'd be going. He's actually saying he needs to go. But do you think Clay Matthews needs to go? Could you see the Packers moving him inside and keeping him for a lower price?
So, because he's a free agent, so he can sign with anybody. I don't even know if they could afford to pay him $5 million a year now. Maybe they could. They probably, if they really want to, they can do anything they want. If they really want to do it, they can make the moves to do it. I would think the odds went way, 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 way down though, and he's going to get offers. You got to think he'd much prefer to play in Southern California if he could. So if either of those two teams are after him, you would think he would be really interested in that.
Mm-hmm. I would like to go to Southern California.
Yes,
too.
we
Sounds fun.
We all would.
It sounds warm. It's been nice here in Green Bay. Can't complain. Kyle wants to know, any chance the Packers look at a veteran backup quarterback? Deshaun Kaiser, future isn't looking super bright in Green Bay, although he did work with Matt LaFleur at Notre Dame back in the day.
He did.
Not that necessarily means anything for Kaiser's future in Green Bay, but fun factoid. Do you see Kaiser sticking around? Is Tim Boyle going to be the new number 2?
If I were I would think, Kaiser and Boyle will go to camp. And if I were a betting man, I'd bet on Boyle for that. I don't, as far as Kyle's question, I would think the odds of bringing in a veteran after all these signings and all the money they're spending, you can't have everything, so they got to cut back somewhere. I would think the odds of signing another veteran quarterback would be pretty slim. Now watch them, 20 minutes from now, it'll come across that they signed some backup quarterback, but that would be my best guess.
So Antonetta wants to know if the Packers are going to bring back Bashaud Breeland, cornerback.
I would think they would want to.
You would think so.
My guess is, I'm just guessing, so this is no inside information. He had that big contract in Carolina last year, then he got hurt when he had the golf cart incident, and so that went out the window, and he couldn't play until early in the season. Then he got hurt during the season. I would guess he's going to have to do a 1-year inexpensive deal. So I wouldn't be surprised if they could get him for 1 year at, I don't know, $2.5 million or even less.
You would think
so. I would think there's a chance that he's back.
Yeah, he's on a cheap 1-year deal.
Yeah, he's got to show he can be healthy, and that's what he had last year was a really cheap deal. So he's got to show that he can stay healthy, and then maybe next year he can get a pretty decent contract. Although, by then he's not going to be the youngest guy, but I don't think he'll be 30 yet. So.
No, I think he's 26, 27 now.
Yeah, I think he's one of those two. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely a possibility. Even though I think he played 7 games this season. Yeah. He had a pick 6. And
he did fine, and I could see that could be a guy they might want to move to safety even. He's a ball hawk, and he's, it's a good place for guys who are just a tad slower at corner.
Mm-hmm. Kyle thinks Noah Fant is the best tight end available in the draft. Maybe.
That would be interesting because the other guy. What is it, Hawkinson?
T.J. Hawkinson.
T.J. Hawkinson. Yeah. Fant is definitely the better athlete, the faster guy and all that. Hawkinson's a blocker, though, and Matt LaFleur wants to run that outside zone. And so Hawkinson, maybe he'd appeal more to the Packers because he'd be a better blocker for the outside zone, which are outside runs. The tight end's pretty important on those.
Very important. Speaking of offense, Randall Cobb, Scott wants to know, will the Packers be keeping him It's seeming like a long shot.
Yeah, I would think very slim to zero chance there.
But who is his replacement? They have not found one in free agency yet.
I wonder if they're going to have to draft one, and it'll be, a guy, they need a kick returner too. So, maybe they can find a short receiver who's a good kick returner and a quick guy. But even then, if he's a slot receiver, a rookie, he would probably only contribute so much. 30 catches would probably be a lot.
Right. In addition to drafting a wide receiver this upcoming April, Nick wants to know if we have any thoughts on drafting an offensive lineman in the draft. I think that's going to have to be an option for the Packers.
Oh yeah, could even be a first round option if they really like one of those guys. Definitely could be an option at 30. They need even if they keep Ulaga this year, they need somebody to be their right tackle of the future. They could draft a guy who could play either tackle or guard. He could compete with Turner for the the new signed Turner for the right starting job at right guard. I would think offensive line is still a high priority on their draft list.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we haven't really talked about any of the guys that they've signed yet. Nobody really has a lot of. I'm looking at your questions right now. I'm sorry, there's so many of them. We're trying to get through as many as we can of them. But do you have any initial impressions? Well, we can start with Billy Turner from the Broncos. He's had some experience playing both at tackle and guard, which
I don't know a lot about him, and he hasn't started a ton of games. 12 last year at both guard and tackle. They're paying him pretty good money for a guy who's not all that proven. It tells you that they really, I got to think he's the guy they're assuming is going to be their starter at right guard. And both of the Smiths are pretty good rushers. Neither one's a great rusher. You sign these guys early like this, you got to overpay a little bit. But if they're good, solid players, then if they had another rusher in the draft, then they'll have some guys, a rotation they can go with. Throw in Fackrell. They got good inside rushers with King and Clark. So they seem to want to be able to, they're kind of going after numbers rather than building the pass rush around one great player like a Khalil Mack, for instance.
So the Packers have signed these two edge rushers. What are the implications for Muhammad Wilkerson and his future in Green Bay?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I would think it would be a lot less likely they sign him now because they've added two guys who, even though they're outside linebackers, with how much nickel they play, they're basically defensive linemen. So I would think a little less likely, but he's not going to be expensive either, so can't say for sure.
Yeah. That was a question that was from Todd, by the way. Thanks, guys. We are scrolling. Kurt wants to see Clay Matthews back for $5 million for 1 year. I think we.
I would guess he'll get a little better offer from somebody, either a longer term deal with with more guaranteed money. But you never know though. It's looking you never know for sure how somebody's market's going to be. Le'Veon Bell, it sounds like his market's a little depressed.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, what's going on there? So if you haven't noticed, he changed his Twitter font color to green, which I think a lot of people initially thought Jets, and I think that is the case. Initially, Tom Silverstein did some digging and found out that the Packers may have inquired about Le'Veon Bell, but were not seriously in the mix for him.
That would make the most sense. It sounds like they probably inquired on a lot of guys. They wanted to at least find out what was going on. A lot of guys, they must have had a lot of different plans. Hey, if this guy's cheap enough, we'll go there. If not, we're going here. That's a lot of scenarios to work through.
Matthew wants the Packers to sign Justin Houston from Kansas City. Again, at this point, after all the signings they've supposedly done today, is that a realistic option?
I would think that would be a little steep, and it would be pushing too much money into future caps. That would be my guess, because even if his market isn't great, he's still going to be a $10 million guy, I would think, at least.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So based on where the Packers are now with the two new edge rushers and Kyler Fackrell in the mix, Tim wants to know thoughts on the state of the Packers pass rush.
Theoretically, on paper and all that, it should be better. It sounds like I was asking a scout today about Ladarius Smith, and he said he's a power rusher like Nick Perry, but he's tougher and he thinks he's tougher and a little better than Perry. So an upgrade there, especially because Perry, hardly missed so many games and played injured so much. It should be better than last year, and I know they finished 8th in sacks, I think it was, but that was kind of a smoke and mirrors, and their pass rush was not the 8th best in the NFL.
Sure. Ave, not sure how to pronounce your name, but he wants another running back.
Yeah, I agree. They definitely need one.
Yeah, they definitely need one. Where's it going to come from, though? The draft or free agency?
I would assume the draft. I mean, I know I saw that they were supposedly interested in Ingram, but I would think that would be a little steep. And, you can find them in the draft. And now, with all these moves they've made, if there's one there early in the second round that they really like, boom, they could take him if they want. And they don't have to worry about, neglecting other positions.
I know there's a lot of you out there, because we've heard from a lot of you this past season, that love Aaron Jones for good reason. But what would you say to the people out there that say, why not just keep feeding the ball to Aaron Jones?
Because he won't last the season. 3 MCLs in 13 months. He's been in the league 2 years. He's, had 3 MCLs already. Missed most of training camp last year with a hamstring. His college history was the same. He had several injuries in college. Very good player, but now I can better appreciate how Mike McCarthy felt last year, because he knew if he played him too much, the guy'd get hurt, and he did get hurt. I think he's a guy you got to limit his touches. I don't know,
right.
10 or 12 a game at the most.
So a third running back is necessary.
I would think so. Jamal Williams is a good football player and a guy you like to have in your team, but they need, with how much LaFleur wants to run the ball to set up that passing game, that outside zone run, he needs another good running back.
Mm-hmm. So just piggybacking, I think, on everything we've already been talking about, Andy wants to know if the Packers are done with making major moves in free agency. Was today one foul swoop?
I got to think so. Like, we talked earlier about this. I mean, you never know. But I got to think so. And, yeah, Earl Thomas or Houston, I'd be really, really surprised if they push money into future caps and mortgage the future to sign another big-ticket guy.
I don't know what that stands for. SWFL, Packers Fan Club, just said the word Kumaro. So I'm assuming he's asking about whether or not
Southwest Florida, is that a thing?
Maybe. You know what? I see in your little avatar, you know what? You're right. There's state of Florida.
No, is there?
Yes. Shout out to the Southwest
it's very small. But
Packers
yes.
Fan Club. That's great.
Kumaro, I was probably talking about him for slot guy, which, that's true. He could be. He's a potential for the slot.
I was assuming he wanted to check to see if the Packers tendered.
Oh, if they tendered him, that's probably that's
probably
you're probably
not.
right. I would think they did. The quarterback liked him. The quarterback likes throwing the ball to him.
If you had to give all the signings today a grade, Josh wants to know, what would your grade be?
Yeah, it's pretty treacherous territory, Josh.
Too early?
But we'll wing it. No, give it a shot. But it's just total guesswork. Most of the time, the teams that win free agency don't win on the field. That's been the history of the NFL. Now, teams have gotten smarter about the way they spend their money. I'd have to give them a B or B minus, I would say. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Pro Football Focus gave the Packers the gold star so far.
Oh, no kidding.
Well, I just made up gold star, but they said that they won free agency. Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever that means.
They grade every player around the league. Now, they don't know the schemes, they don't know the play calls, but it's just like when you're scouting another team. If you work for one team, you don't know the other team's calls. But that's an interesting point of view, because they have a pretty good league-wide grasp of things, the guys that work there and are doing all that grading.
Mm-hmm. Kyle wants to know about Golden Tate being an option at wide receiver for the Packers. But again, as we've mentioned before, signing additional players in free agency sounds like it's going to be
It could be. No, but I mean, maybe his market is really depressed. I think he's over 30, so, that could be an issue. He's a potential slot guy. I would think he'd be too expensive, but it's never say never on any of these guys that you're bringing up.
Mm-hmm. Lamont wants to know if Adrian Amos is a good fit for the Packers.
I think so. Just from talking with somebody who works in the division today, they said, from what they could tell, he's a really smart player, which, Pettin's going to love that. And he's always where he's supposed to be. And he's not a free safety type. He's a little more of a box safety type. But I saw some highlights today of him playing all over the field. He's not a great player. He's not going to be a big difference maker, but a good, solid safety. They didn't even have that last year with Clinton Dix gambling all the time and Bryce having trouble playing the ball in the air.
Mm-hmm. And he's young, and I think a big theme with all these guys is that they're under 28.
Yeah, the way I would look at all these deals is look at them as 2-year deals. If they get 2 years out of these guys, they've done okay. I think that's the way the teams and the players look at it. Even though they're 4 or 5 year contracts, they're really 1 and 2 year deals, and these all look like 2-year deals to me.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys, getting through all your questions here.
Somebody's asking about Hendrickson. He's talking about the PackersNews scout who worked for the Ravens, and I'm sure he had to have some influence. He knows the player well. He worked with him for the last 4 years. So
similarly with Olivia, who was with the Redskins.
Yep.
Before.
So yeah, they had inside info on both of these guys. So you would think that that matters a lot because they will have seen the work habits and know all the ins and outs.
Mm-hmm. That's a question from Mike. Thank you, Mike, for commenting. Kyle wants to know if there's anyone on the Packers who would be a candidate for restructuring their contract.
Any of the big money guys would, but I would think they're going to try to avoid that like the plague. They're already, with what they did with these guys' contracts, they're already pushing cap money into the future. They can't go crazy there. Then they're really mortgaging their future and putting that in jeopardy. So my guess is that they won't do any restructuring. They'd be more likely to just cut somebody than restructure.
Mm-hmm. So James says that in his opinion, the best free agent signing for Green Bay will be Fidel Brown, who was claimed off of waivers pretty late in the season last year from Oakland originally, who released him. We didn't see a whole lot of him last season, but when we did see him, what did you think of him?
He was a decent, it was as good as you could hope for grabbing a guy basically off the street like that. It was a good pickup for him. I don't know that I would consider him a better signing than the 2 pass rushers. You would. If it is, then they made huge mistakes paying all that money to those guys.
Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to see Ingram on the Packers, so we've already, if you're just joining us, Pete, what was your answer to that?
For Ingram?
Yes.
Best guess is it'd be a little too expensive, but he is a 29-year-old running back, so maybe his market will be super depressed, and maybe they can get him on the cheap. I'd bet pretty strongly against it.
Kyle asks, any chance the Packers bring back TJ Lang, who may or may not be coming back to football, period.
Yeah, I would think the concussions and the back injury issues, that'd be too big a risk for them. They'd be afraid that he'd end up, they'd pay him all this money and he'd end up on injured reserve. Great guy to have in your team, great guy to have in your locker room, but just that recent injury history, I would guess would scare them off.
Mm-hmm. Someone had asked about Jimmy Graham coming back. Jeremy says that Jimmy Graham needs to get benched. That's a lot of money just to put some guy on the bench.
Yeah, they're not stuck with that. If they bench him, if they're going to bench him, they should cut him because they can, even though they'll eat some money, they'll overall save a few million in cap money. So that's another guy that if they really wanted to, they could cut if they want to sign another big ticket guy. Doesn't sound like that's the way what they're thinking, though. Yeah,
Tom Silverstein made an interesting argument earlier in the week about keeping Nick Perry and cutting Jimmy Graham.
Yeah, I personally would have cut both of them if I were them, but they must think that LaFleur must think that he can get something out of Graham with his offense that Mike McCarthy didn't with his.
When I think of Jimmy Graham, I think of a wide receiver.
He's a glorified wide receiver.
Which is interesting because that's not what the tight ends are going to be doing that we know of in Matt LaFleur's.
That's why I don't get why they kept him, because he wants those guys to block. And, Graham is definitely worth it if you need somebody to stretch the field. He would have been worth it 3 years ago or 4 years ago because he was one of those athletic, fast tight ends, but he's not that either now. So I don't get why they're keeping him. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but they have their reasons.
Would they ever consider moving him from tight end
to receiver?
Maybe.
Well, they could play him like one. Yeah. Basically, without making a position change, they could just call plays where he lines up outside.
Sure. Yeah. All right.
And they did a fair amount of that last year. Yeah, he's not an inline tight end. That's just not his strength.
Mm-hmm. Question. So no one's asked about this, but this is something Ryan and I talked about earlier in the week. Talked about Mercedes Lewis potentially be an interesting candidate to return to the Packers. Ryan thought he was a pretty solid blocker and didn't like Mike McCarthy's offense, was pretty vocal about not liking it, but hey, new offense. Why not give it a shot?
He's old, and this is a young man's game. He's 34 now, I think, right?
Jeez.
I wonder if he'll be 35 by next season, maybe even. So I'm having a little more trouble seeing that than Ryan, but he is a blocker. That's his thing, so it's a possibility.
Starting to see a lot of the same questions. I'm not sure how much we've scrolled here.
Somebody's asking about Rodgers restructuring.
Yeah.
Now, I think you have to, if you do a contract, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think you might have to wait a year to do a restructure then. And he signed that deal in August, so I think they would have to wait till after August to restructure again. I'm not positive about that, but I think so. But either way, like I said earlier, they're already pushing money into future caps. I would be really surprised if they did restructures and pushed further money. I would think they'd be more likely to cut guys for cap room than to push money and push money into future years. That's just my best guess, but they're starting to, they're mortgaging the future at least a little bit. I don't think they want to go any farther.
John wants to know if the Packers would be willing to trade up for Bosa or Montez Sweat. Who would be better, or just who's better in general, who's going to go first.
Yeah.
I know something that you guys have written about already is that the Packers most likely will not and should not trade up from 12.
Yeah, and I was wondering if does all this change that thinking now? Could they feel better about going for broke since they've added 4 guys, significant players to the roster?
Right.
But I thought Tom Silverstein laid out a pretty strong argument that at 12 you have a decent chance of getting a pretty talented player. You move back a few spots and the odds start going down more. Of course, you have better odds at 3 or 4 than you do at 12, but the cost to get up there is pretty high. My guess is the smart thing to do is to sit there and pick, because they'll probably have a chance at a pretty talented guy there. I think Aaron Donald was the 13th pick of his draft. Deshaun Watson was the 12th pick of his draft. That's right around where your odds are still not too bad, relatively speaking. It's still less than 50%, but your odds are quite a bit better at 12 than they are at 16 or 17 or 18. And the cost to move up to 3 or 4, if I were a betting man, I'd bet against it. But you never know what they think. And if they think Bosa or Sweat or somebody else is really special and they can get him with the 3rd pick, I mean, if you think he's Khalil Mack, then you do it,
Do you think their odds of doing that are higher today than they were 2 days ago?
Yeah, but it could be a jump from 1% to 2%, something like that. But yeah, I would think the odds would be at least a hair better. Yeah.
All right, cool. Andrew and both Jiff, not sure. I'm sure you get a lot of people asking you how you pronounce that. They want to know about Jared Cook, whether or not the Packers would want to try to add him at tight end. Ryan Wood and I also spoke about this. Video is still up on PackersNews. We talked about some potential free agent targets for the Packers. And Ryan pretty much said, definitely not. That's not going to happen.
I would think highly unlikely. If they did, you'd have to cut Graham. And even that would only pay for maybe not even half the salary probably. So I would think highly unlikely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kim wants to know, is this Kevin King's last chance? Is this the final year the Packers give him before they say, hey, you know what? You're not performing the way we want you to. You're not staying healthy. We need to move on.
Probably not. He's on a rookie contract, so even the cost in 2020 won't be very expensive. They used a high pick on him, and the first pick of the 2nd round, right? So, no, I don't think this is his last chance. But they really could use him to stay healthy, because when he and Alexander were on the field together last season, that defense improved noticeably. Mm-hmm. But that was only. How many games were they together? 2 or 3 where they were both out there for most of the game?
Again, GIF, I am so sorry. Is Billy Turner going to start on the O-line? I'd imagine he's probably competing with Jason Spriggs
for right guard?
Yeah.
Yeah, and whoever else. I would. The money they're paying him, $7 million a year, would suggest that they think he's probably going to be their starter at right guard.
And Todd says they are not paying $7 million for a backup, so there's that from Todd. Gotta love it. Let's see. Nolan wants to know, do you think the Packers are going to draft a quarterback this season?
I could see it, yeah. fifth round on back, sure. Even I shouldn't say that. Even earlier, if they'd liked a guy enough, they could do it. Especially making these moves. If there's a guy in the third or fourth round that they thought they really, really liked and were just stunned that he was still on the board, can't rule it out.
Cool. I think we're actually all caught up to the questions. We've been going for a little over a half hour, so we'll take a couple more. Let's see what else we got. Again, the veteran backup quarterback question. This time from Josh. Earlier we talked about that.
You can't have everything in this league, and with all the money they just spent today, I would think it's pretty highly unlikely that they'd go after a veteran guy, even if a guy, for $2.5 million, even that's at this point that's enough money where it matters now on their cap, and for any other moves they might want to make over the next. We still have 2 more weeks of this left, and.
Oh my gosh.
You never know who's going to be sitting out there with a depressed market who they think could help them.
Sure. Jeremiah wants to know our thoughts on DK Metcalf, who made a big splash at the Combine. A lot of people have been talking about him and asking about him. Going into the Combine, was he someone who was under the radar? Is he still not on the radar because of his Combine?
I don't think he was under the radar, but I think there were questions. I'm not sure how great his production was, the consistency was, but people thought he was going to test well, but then he just tested unbelievably. So this guy's a spectacular athlete. The mock drafts I've seen, I seem to think all of them have him going in the top 10. So I don't know what chance there is that he'd be there at 12. But if he's there, they got to at least think about it. Now it just depends on if they think he's also a good football player too, besides being this. Adonis, this Adonis physique and a really fast, gifted guy as far as, just running and jumping and all that stuff.
Alan points out that he thinks Jason Spriggs will be a good fit in the outside zone offensive scheme. Apparently it's the same scheme that they ran when he played at Indiana.
I didn't know that. I'd have to check on that. I'm sure you're right, Alan. The one thing I wonder is if he's just quite strong enough for NFL, playing against NFL players every week, and to get strong enough, does he lose a little too much athleticism? I still think things are looking pretty shaky for him.
All right, cool guys. Well, thank you for all your questions. We appreciate it. We tried to get to as many as we humanly possibly could, so thank you for being patient. And if we didn't get to your question, I guarantee you we will be back to talk to you at some point. Perhaps this week, perhaps next week, but as always, you can certainly tweet us your questions. We will try to answer them elsewhere. So thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully today's free agency was a little bit more exciting than yesterday. I don't know about you.
It's a whole new world.
I saw a lot of tweets out there that were like, oh, we're just continuing down the same old Ted Thompson era path.
I wonder what Ted thinks of all this.
Yes, I'm sure he's sitting somewhere and is very amused following along with all of this. But anyway, thank you guys so much. We appreciate your joining us. We will see you guys very soon. Have a good one.